I still remember the morning of June 6, 1944, as if it were yesterday. The sea was gray and choppy, and the sky threatened rain, but the orders were clear. Storm Omaha Beach. My name is James Carter, Private First Class, 1st Infantry Division. I was 19, barely old enough to understand the horrors that awaited me. But I had no choice. Duty didn't wait for fear. The landing craft shook violently as we approached the beach. Men beside me whispered prayers. Some cried silently. Others stared straight ahead, gripping their rifles like lifelines. I remember thinking, if I survive this, I'll never be the same again. The ramp dropped, and the hell of Normandy opened before us. Bullets screamed, artillery roared, and the air smelled of salt, smoke, and blood. I was thrown to the sand by the sheer force of a nearby explosion. Men around me fell like wheat in a storm. I crawled forward every inch a fight against death. Somehow I made it past the barbed wire and reached the first line of defense. My best friend, Tommy, was beside me one moment, gone the next, ripped apart by shrapnel. I shouted his name until my voice gave out. There was no time to grieve. Every second was a fight to survive. By nightfall, we held a precarious position on the cliffs overlooking the beach. Our numbers had dwindled. Out of my company, only 20 remained. I found shelter in a crumbling bunker, its walls stained with the memories of men who had been here before me. I could hear the distant cries of the wounded and the low moans of the dying. Sleep was impossible. All I could do was stare at the ceiling, clutching my rifle, and remember home. My mother's voice, the smell of my father's old workshop, the laughter of my little sister. I repeated them like a mantra. They were the only things keeping me from going mad. Weeks turned into months. The push through France was brutal. I saw entire villages destroyed, fields scorched, and rivers stained red. One night, during a patrol near a small town outside Carentan, our squad was ambushed. I was separated, hiding behind a ruined stone wall as German soldiers searched for survivors. I held my breath, heart pounding so violently I thought they would hear it. One of them came close, the shadow of his helmet brushing against mine. But somehow fate spared me. He moved on and I waited hours before I dared to move. Food was scarce. Water was often tainted. I learned to survive on whatever I could find. Berries, stale bread, rainwater collected in leaves. I scavenged German supplies from abandoned positions, risking sniper fire and patrols for every can of food. My uniform was tattered, my boots worn through, my hands cracked and bloody, but I refused to give up. Survival became a game of cunning, patience, and luck. The coldest nights were the hardest. In December, during the Battle of the Bulge, the snow fell in relentless sheets. I remember crouching in a shallow foxhole, the wind cutting through every layer of clothing, my fingers numb beyond sensation. Around me, men shivered and whispered stories of home to keep their minds alive. I whispered to myself too, repeating my mother's lullabies, imagining my sister's laughter echoing through the woods of Belgium. Then came the day I was captured. I had been scouting alone when a patrol of German soldiers surrounded me. They forced me into a truck with other prisoners, their eyes cold, their boots kicking the snow. The camp was in the Ardennes forest, a makeshift POW compound that smelled of smoke, fear, and despair. We were crammed into wooden huts, given meager rations, and watched by guards who seemed to enjoy cruelty. I thought of giving up, of letting the cold and hunger take me, but every time I saw a fellow prisoner with the same haunted eyes, refusing to die, I felt a spark of hope. I had to survive, not just for myself, but for them. Every day I counted the rations, conserved strength, and learned the guards' routines. I listened, I watched, I planned. Escape became not just a desire, but an obsession. One night a blizzard raged outside. Visibility was almost zero. I seized the moment. Quietly I slipped out of the hut, creeping through the snowdrifts, heartsick with fear. Each step could be my last. I avoided patrols, followed the terrain I had memorized, and finally stumbled into the dark forest beyond the camp. The snow swallowed my footprints and I moved like a shadow. Days passed in isolation, my body screaming in protest, but the thought of freedom pushed me forward. I survived on frozen streams, scavenged food, and sheer determination. I was delirious, hallucinating at times, but the human spirit has a way of refusing death when hope is alive. Eventually, I stumbled upon an Allied unit patrolling the forest. They looked at me like I had risen from the dead. I collapsed in their arms, weak, starving, but alive. Back in the States, I was treated for frostbite, malnutrition, and exhaustion. I never spoke much about what I saw, what I endured. Some stories are too heavy to tell. But every night, I dream of that beach, of Tommy, of the men who never made it out. I dream of the snow, the forest, the relentless fear that became my companion for months. Survival in war is not just about skill or luck. It's about refusing to surrender to the darkness. It's about holding on to memory, hope, and love, even when the world is crumbling around you. I survived because I imagined my mother's face, my sister's laughter, and the promise that one day I would see them again. That promise carried me through the fire, the cold, and the despair. Even now, decades later, when I walk past cemeteries lined with crosses, when I hear the stories of young soldiers who fight for freedom, I remember the price of survival, the faces of those who fell, the fear that never leaves a soldier's mind, the bond formed in shared suffering. I survived, yes, but I carry with me the weight of every man who did not. This is the story of a soldier who refused to die, not because he was brave or strong, but because he carried hope as a weapon heavier than any rifle, more unyielding than any bullet. And that, perhaps, is the truest lesson of war. Survival is never just about the body. It's about the spirit that refuses to surrender.